The Afghan pilot who penned a moving letter to the wife and 7 children of a U.S. service member and city mayor killed days ago in Afghanistan tells VOA he wrote the tribute to let them know how much their husband and father had inspired him. Pentagon correspondent Carla Babb talks to those whose lives were impacted by the slain soldier.
Afghan Special Mission pilot Major Abdul Rahman Rahmani served alongside slain Utah National Guardsman Major Brent Taylor on multiple missions.
And one of our missions was delayed for like 3 days, so we had a great deal of time together.
During those times, Taylor would give his Afghan counterparts positive messages and often talked about the future of Afghanistan.
You would be motivated throughout the day. It was amazing. He was an amazing guy. He was really, really incredible.
Their friendship was a glimmer of humanity, forged in the darkness of a cruel war that's killed thousands of Afghans and Americans over the last 17 years. Rahmani never expected his letter to Taylor's wife to go viral. In the letter, he wrote that Taylor taught him to be a better father, a better husband, a better man. He told VOA that Taylor even convinced him to apologize to his wife after overhearing an argument they had.
He was not shy about his opinions and what he thought, and he would tell you when you were wrong.
That's Adam Gardner, a friend of Taylor's who runs in the same Utah political circles as the North Ogden mayor did.
But he never made you feel like he was attacking you ever.
Gardner said many times he and Taylor would start talking or texting about politics, but end up talking about their families.
And to be able to volunteer for another tour of duty is just the ultimate selfless service, because I know, because he talks about it so often, I know how much those kids and his wife meant to him.
Taylor's body was returned to the United States as millions of Americans cast their votes for local, state, and national representatives. In a Facebook post just days before his death, Taylor pleaded with Americans to vote, stressing that there was far more as Americans that unites us than divides us. Thousands of miles away in Afghanistan, Rahmani told VOA he hoped his letter also conveyed a message of solidarity against those who wish to divide American and Afghan allies.
You cannot change our mentality, and you cannot change our bond, our unity.
Rahmani, who has been wounded twice and has lost several family members during the war, vowed to persevere and continue the fight for his homeland.
This country needs people to defend it. If I leave this country, if I quit, who's gonna take this responsibility? Somebody must take the responsibility. I want to be one.
Carla Babb, VOA News, the Pentagon.
VOA Pentagon correspondent Carla Babb recently spoke exclusively with Chief of Naval Operations Admiral John Richardson. They discussed a wide array of topics. Carla started her conversation with Admiral Richardson by asking him about the reactivation of the U.S. Navy Second Fleet and the importance of the North Atlantic.
I'll just put it in the context of this. We just did another trip recently where we visited a lot of our northern European allies and partners. Started in Norway, went to Denmark, to the United Kingdom, and then to Iceland. And there were two themes that emerged from those visits that every one of those nations really touched on. One was they were also very interested in what we intended to do with this second fleet, right? What is this going to do? What does it mean? And the other thing was that they were very mindful of the resurgent Russian threat, not only in the Baltic, not only in the Eastern Mediterranean, but also, out into the North Atlantic. And particularly their undersea threat, I would say, is on many people's minds.
What kind of threat are we talking about?
I would say operating at a tempo that we haven't seen since the end of the Cold War, right? And it doesn't go up to the Cold War levels where they had, a lot bigger Navy, but the tempo has definitely picked up, and we're seeing sort of unprecedented levels of activity over the last 25 years.
Okay, what about the Chinese? Are they a threat in the Northern Atlantic, or is it really just a Russian threat?
The Chinese are definitely present in that theater, particularly since we're talking about the Second Fleet in the maritime domain. And so we've seen Chinese naval expeditionary task forces move around the North Atlantic, into the Atlantic, the Mediterranean. They do, make visits there. And so this is a new dynamic. Even 5 years ago, we wouldn't have seen anything like this. So as this theater gets more complicated, more complex, more active, we're going to need some kind of a command structure that can respond to that. And so what we've got is, the Second Fleet was stood up exactly to address that challenge.
It feels from the outside that China in the South China Sea is incrementally inching forward, trying to change the rules. What is the U.S. response to that? How does the U.S. counter that?
Well, I think our response would be consistency. And so we have, for 70 years now, been consistently present in the South China Sea at about the same force levels, right? I mean, nothing has elevated too much or decreased too much. We've been pretty steady, consistent. During that time, we have consistently advocated for the set of behaviors in accordance with rules and norms that has really, over those 7 decades, fueled the emergence of the Asian economies. I mean, it really has been remarkable. And so that is our plan going forward.
That was VOA Pentagon correspondent Carla Babb speaking with the Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral John Richardson.
They've sent 2 amphibious warships, the Kearsarge and the Arlington, literally following the hurricane to the shore so that way they can begin search and rescue missions along the Carolinas as soon as the storm is over. And people are just trying to remain prepared. The Air Force generals here are just trying to tell us to keep everybody who are local, keep them away from getting out. It's too early to get out and move about. Wait until the storm is over and then move. And hopefully people have evacuated and they're not in some of these really heavily affected areas.
Yeah, one of the characteristics of this particular hurricane is that it's going to linger for a while, just dumping a lot of rain.
It is, yes, and so that is why people said to watch out for the flooding. I know that my family, as you mentioned, I'm from North Carolina, and my aunt and uncle's house has had some flooding. They live very close to the shoreline. Other family members have evacuated, and they did not know the status of their home. So, but many of my family members and friends are without power right now. In fact, some of them lost power yesterday before the storm had even fully hit. So they are looking at this for the long haul. No one is expecting things to be fixed immediately, but the most important thing is that everybody stays safe. And like I said, the military is trying to help with the civilian support for these areas, providing several rotary wing aircraft, those are helicopters, and such, to try to get people out and get people evacuated as soon as possible. After that, they're going to be trying to get the roads up and running again, and then work from there, getting electricity back as well.
Yeah, and I believe there are firefighters from a number of states, as well as I'm sure electric company workers that are heading down to that area just again to support this whole effort to get the power restored.
Absolutely, Sarah. I have heard that there are more than 10 states mobilizing support to help these impacted areas.
All right, thanks very much. That's Pentagon correspondent Carla Babb.
You're ready, you're excited, you're nervous. I haven't been before. Sitting on top of a rocket for the first time and being shot into space, how can you not be nervous?
Astronaut Nick Hague shared his nerves with VOA ahead of the launch, and it appears now he had good reason.
Engines at maximum thrust, liftoff.
And there is liftoff.
The booster of the Russian spacecraft he was in malfunctioned after takeoff.
Emergency booster 2 minutes 45 seconds. The emergency, the failure of the booster.
He and his Russian colleague are safe, but Russian officials have suspended all manned space flights until investigators figure out what went wrong.
Well, another 2,000 troops are on standby at the U.S.-Mexico border to deploy, and those troops are in addition to the 5,200 plus 2,100 National Guard already announced. I'm joined by VOA Pentagon correspondent Carla Babb with the details. Carla, what have officials there said?
Well, that's right, what you said, Sarah. I have just learned that there are an additional 2,000 active duty troops on standby. Now, I know this is a lot of numbers, so I'm going to recap that really quickly. That is 7,300 at least already being deployed to the border. That is more troops than are fighting terrorists in Iraq and Syria right now, U.S. troops.
Army General Joseph Votel, the head of U.S. Central Command, told VOA in exclusive talks by phone Thursday that Russia is posturing to be a player in the solution to the Afghan conflict. Votel is the commander who oversees U.S. forces in the Middle East.
Russia is trying to exert their influence in the area, and they are seeing that we have become very serious about this. And not that we were not serious about it before, but the president has been very serious about it. I think we have a very serious strategy here in terms of what we're trying to do. So I think they are trying to posture themselves to be a player in the solution. The other thing that they are doing is they continue to use disinformation to create the narrative that they want. They continue to perpetuate this idea, not just in Afghanistan, but in Iraq and Syria as well, that the United States is responsible for supporting and propagating ISIS. I mean, as ridiculous as that is, they continue to say it. They continue to talk about it all the time. And I heard it in the last 7 days, just on, with respect to what is happening in Syria. So they're this continuing effort of disinformation to paint a narrative out there is something they do as well.
U.S. Army General Joseph Votel speaking with VOA Pentagon correspondent Carla Babb. A U.S. defense official told VOA on Monday that the Pentagon has canceled plans for Defense Secretary Jim Mattis to visit China after his counterpart in Beijing could not be made available. I'm joined now by VOA Pentagon correspondent Carla Babb. Well, this just suddenly came up, Carla.
Hi, Sarah. Yes, actually, this was decided late last week, and these things happen from time to time, and they usually go unreported, but what is so significant about this particular cancellation is that it's coming on a pattern of cancellations because China last week recalled its naval chief. That naval chief was supposed to be meeting with Admiral Richardson, who is the chief of naval operations for the United States. And then China also denied a Hong Kong port visit request from the USS Wasp warship. They had wanted to come in October, and China said no.
Eric Prince promoted his proposal on Kabul television as recently as last week for the government to allow foreign contractors to support Afghan forces in the fight against the Taliban. He claimed it could end the war in 6 months. Well, I'm joined by VOA Pentagon correspondent Carla Babb. So, Afghanistan's government pretty much has quashed this.
Absolutely, yes. In fact, we were speaking with General Joseph Votel. He is the commander of U.S. Central Command, which oversees the operations in Afghanistan, and he said that this is not possible, that it has been contradicted by the Afghan government, the Secretary of Defense, and that the most significant downside of this would be that the United States would be turning over its national interest over to contractors, and that even if this was something that the United States was interested in, there's a bilateral security agreement that the United States has with the Afghan government that won't allow this to happen.
Yeah, I mean, but the idea of privatizing military action or military, a war it's rather incredible.
It is, because you've got so many things outside of the war itself, the rebuilding, the supporting of the Afghanistan government. All of that has to come from the State Department. This isn't strictly a military thing, so to think that this could be contracted out just doesn't make sense for the United States or the Afghan government.